For years, the Kremlin has been imposing a narrative on the world and its own people. According to this narrative, Russia advances, Ukraine resists but eventually wears down, and time, as always, works in Moscow's favor. However, reports coming from the front lines in the second week of May 2026 are shattering this narrative. This is not a local success or a coincidence occurring in a single corner of the map. Along a roughly 1,100-kilometer stretch from Luhansk to Crimea, the Ukrainian army is applying coordinated pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. And every point where this pressure is applied exposes a different military, logistical, or psychological weakness of Russia. The front line is not a conveyor belt on which Russia can comfortably swallow up Ukrainian territory. On the contrary, the gears are breaking and the belt is beginning to reverse. Now, let's examine step by step how the plan, the one Putin claimed was going exactly as planned, has actually reached a dead end. We begin reading the fracture on the map from the quietest yet most strategic corner of the Eastern Front. On May 12th, the Ukrainian armed forces took control of 3 critical settlements in the direction of Svatove: Krekivka, Karmazinkivka, and Kovalivka. These 3 villages are located 12 kilometers west of the town of Svatove, along a front line near the Kharkiv-Luhansk Oblast border. So, why are these 3 small villages so important? These settlements, which appear as small dots on the map, are actually the key connection points of Russia's main defensive backbone on the Eastern Front. The Svatove-Kremina axis is Russia's most vital supply and defense line in Luhansk. Remember that major Russian retreat in the fall of 2022. This line was the last lifeline the Russian army managed to cling to in that panic. Now Ukraine is gradually chipping away at the western flank of this vital line. Every village recaptured puts additional strain on the Russian army's logistics network, forces it to extend supply routes, and dangerously thins its defensive depth. The capture of Kharkivka is particularly critical, because this move puts the key to a potential large-scale advance toward Borova in Ukraine's hands. Behind these advances are several experienced units operating in the Kharkiv and Luhansk directions. According to open-source reports, elements of the 14th Mechanized Brigade and the 92nd Mechanized Brigade, along with National Guard units, are actively engaged in the region. The tactics employed by these units reflect the classic Ukrainian model. First, Russian positions are identified and mapped using drone reconnaissance. Then, these positions are suppressed with artillery fire. And finally, small infantry groups launch clearance operations. Russia's strategy in this region is based on infiltration attempts by small groups, and Ukraine responds to each infiltration attempt with a hold counterattack cycle. Russian reconnaissance groups advance, Ukrainian drones detect them, artillery opens coordinated fire, and infantry units clear the infiltration points with a counterattack. Reports from similar frontline operations indicate that elements such as fog and night operations are frequently utilized in this process. Low visibility conditions provide an advantage to Ukraine's small and agile assault groups, and Ukraine's pressure in Svatove is not an isolated incident. The same model is at work in the west as well. A very clear breakthrough occurred on May 10th in the direction of Kupiansk. Ukrainian forces repelled Russian units that had gathered south of Krugliakivka. Kupiansk is no ordinary city. It is a massive railway junction that Russia has become obsessed with since its 2022 defeat and has spent months trying to recapture. Moreover, breaking news is emerging from every corner of this city. Russian positions just a few kilometers beyond Kupiansk have also been cleared. The Russians had effectively turned an ordinary residential building into a small, impregnable fortress. Inside, approximately 10 Russian soldiers, armed with heavy weapons and positioned in crossfire to support one another, were waiting. According to military literature, such buildings are the deadliest points on the front line. What happens in a classic textbook operation? Ukrainian infantry would storm the building, clear it, fight through ambushes at every corner, and inevitably suffer heavy casualties in the process. But this time, not a single Ukrainian soldier set foot on the battlefield. Instead, a futuristic killing machine silently took position. At the heart of the operation was the Tor 800, a ground-based robotic system carrying thermobaric rockets. Thermobaric munitions are unlike conventional explosives. First, it releases a dense cloud of fuel into the air, then ignites that cloud with intense heat. The resulting massive pressure wave seeps into every crevice of the building and sucks all the oxygen out within seconds. The Lava Battalion, part of the Katyia 2nd Corps, utilized this system to take down this fortress in Kupiansk. Alongside the TOR-800 were explosive-laden kamikaze ground robots and drones, providing aerial surveillance and attack support. All these systems operated in a coordinated network. The first devastating strike came from the TOR-800. Thermobaric rockets turned the building's facade into a hellish inferno. Windows and trenches were shattered. Russian soldiers inside were blown from their firing positions by a deadly shockwave. Before the Russians could even comprehend what was happening or regroup, the second wave infiltrated the building. Explosive-laden kamikaze ground robots began entering the building through the collapsed doors. Simultaneously, kamikaze drones dove from the sky. Faced with this flawless, synchronized, multi-threat assault from both air and ground, the Russian defense collapsed within seconds. Russian soldiers couldn't even lift their heads. And the final blow? A massive ground robot carrying hundreds of kilograms of explosives reached the very center of the building without encountering any obstacles and detonated itself. The Russian ammunition depot in the basement was blown to pieces by a massive secondary explosion. The building collapsed in on itself within seconds, and that so-called impregnable Russian position was completely wiped off the map, along with everyone inside. The Lava Regiment recorded this flawless operation, carried out in February 2026, and whose footage was released to the world in May in military literature as a fully robotic attack. Now we turn our attention to the north of the Kharkiv region. Let's look at the area around the town of Vovchansk, located just 5 to 6 kilometers from the Russian border. During April and May 2026, the Ukrainian army turned Russia's much-discussed buffer zone plan on its head. The 23rd Assault Battalion, part of the elite Katyia 2nd Corps of the Ukrainian National Guard, carried out a coordinated assault operation in one of the most complex and challenging sectors of the front. Assault groups rapidly breached the Russians' first line of contact, thoroughly clearing forward defensive positions and massive company-level fortifications. The results of this operation were immediately reflected on the battlefield. The village of Staritsia came under Ukrainian control, and the units advanced into the dense forested area north of the village. This is crucial. Staritsia is just 4 to 5 kilometers from the Russian border. In military analyses, clearing forested areas is often underestimated, but the reality on the ground is entirely different. In the forest, every tree is a shelter, every thicket a deadly ambush point, every ditch a hidden minefield. Russia had envisioned these forests as a natural fortress. Ukrainian forces uprooted them from within that fortress. During the same period, the village of Vilcha was also cleared, and strategic positions southeast of Vovchansk were recaptured. It was clearly evident in published operational records that experienced foreign volunteers from Latin America also participated in these operations. So, why is the loss of this region a psychological blow for Russia? Because Russia had deployed not just ordinary troops to this region, but the 69th Motorized Infantry Division, the famous Akhmat Chechen units, and various heavy assault brigades. The objective was to enter Kharkiv via Vovchansk and thereby create a buffer zone to protect Belgorod from Ukrainian rockets. A success achieved by Chechen fighters here was vital for Putin's propaganda of a multinational invincible army. However, reality did not align with the Kremlin's script. Not only did they fail to break through the Ukrainian defense line, they were forced into a full-fledged defensive position. The general sentiment among Russian soldiers is, we're constantly attacking, constantly dying, but we're not gaining anything. This is the most